In November of last year, 2021, we were approached by representatives of the Colonial Athletic Association regarding an invitation to have a conversation about possible conference realignment, about joining the Colonial Athletic Association. This is not an invitation that we solicited or anticipated. Based on the current state of the NCAA as it exists today and as it existed then, which we'll discuss more in just a few minutes, and the obligation that I feel like we have to our current and future student athletes, the decision was made to evaluate this invitation, to look at it, consider what was being offered and proposed, and make a determination about whether or not that fits what A&T is doing and building in our athletics program. That decision to evaluate this invitation should not be viewed in any way or any context, construed in any way, to suggest a level of dissatisfaction or disappointment or frustration with the Big South Conference. Our membership there should not be reflective, should not be used to reflect or draw that conclusion. Having made that decision that we would investigate and evaluate the invitation, we communicated with the Big South Conference and with the Colonial Athletic Association that we would indeed review the invitation. Our assessment would be data-driven. It would be based on objective facts. It would also follow existing institutional processes for vetting and approving these kinds of decisions. And it would follow our calendar. We would work against our stated and published calendar for how decisions are made and when they're made and by what bodies. And so we were going to follow that process in this particular instance as well. Let me give you some background on the NCAA that was certainly in play as we made the decision about investigating this invitation. June of last year, some of you probably recall the Alston case came down from the Supreme Court. Now, the holding in that case was relatively narrow. It essentially suggested that the limitation on educational benefits that schools could provide for student athletes violated antitrust laws, which opened the door for schools to provide more educational benefits for their student athletes than legislation had previously allowed. In a concurring opinion, Justice Kavanaugh stated very clearly, and I have his quote here on the screen in front of you, that from his perspective, the other laws or legislation in the NCAA currently had also, in his mind, bumped against antitrust laws and raised serious issues about their enforceability and the protection which the NCAA had enjoyed from antitrust litigation for decades prior to this decision. 9 days later, the NCAA on June 30th released their interim guidance on name, image, and likeness, essentially providing limited guidance to institutions about how they can help their student athletes generate revenue from their name, image, or likeness while they are participating as amateur athletes on our campuses. 30 days later, the end of July, the NCAA announced that there was a need for a constitutional convention, that we needed to sit down as a 1,000-member strong organization and evaluate our Constitution and restructure it for the developing realities of the current climate and age in which we live and in which we operate intercollegiate athletics. That constitutional convention was held in November. A draft constitution was presented to the membership and was evaluated. In January of this year, that constitution was passed by the membership, adopted by the membership. As part of that new constitution, the transformation committee was established. Legislation requires that the transformation committee's regulations be in place and operational by August of 22. And so there's a lot that we still don't know about how Division I athletics is going to look as it comes out of this transformation. What we do know from the Constitution as it stands today. It's much shorter. It's a much shorter document. And the NCAA has shifted much of what they used to do from a governance perspective to divisions and to conferences. It is clear that the NCAA's posture is going to be to move most of the responsibility for governance of sports, of Division I sports, to the divisional level and to the conference level. They want to move that responsibility and I dare say that liability out of the NCAA office and onto the conferences and onto the individual institutions. I don't know what that will end up looking like. I didn't know in November, and I don't know yet because we're still working through the Transformation Committee. What I do know is what the individuals who are on that Transformation Committee have said about what they'd like to have happen. And it's not a surprise to anyone. They want more of the money. When I say they, I mean the Power Five, the Power Five conferences want more of the money. They want more say over how that money is spent. They want to do things for student athletes right now that are prevented by legislation. There's legislation in place that prevents these schools from providing benefits for their student athletes, which they'd like to provide. And so they want a bigger share of the money, and they want to be able to use that money in ways that they currently can't right now. And let me give you some idea of the money we're talking about. The college football playoff system is about a $460 million enterprise every year. March Madness, based on published reports, about $900 million a year. So that's about 1.3, a little bit north of $1.3 billion that are in play right now that people are talking about in terms of how do we allocate those dollars and then how do we allow institutions to spend those dollars in ways that benefit their student athletes. The third thing they've said is they want to figure out a way to get more of their conference schools in NCAA championship events. There is some frustration, has been some frustration with the AQ process, the automatic qualifier process, where the champion from each of the 32 or 33 Division I conferences is automatically qualified to go to the NCAA championship in that sport. And so you may have a team that's in the middle of the SEC from a basketball perspective who loses a chance to play in March Madness because the conference champion from a much lower ranked conference takes that spot in March Madness. And so they have expressed their frustration with that, and they want to figure out a way to provide opportunities for that 5th and 6th and 7th place team in the SEC or the ACC or the Big 12 to have a chance to go to March Madness and perhaps eliminate some of those opportunities for lower conferences. Again, we're talking about things that might happen. Those are the things that they've said that they're frustrated with. So we'll know more by the end of the summer about what the population, what the NCAA will look like. Will there be 4 divisions? Will we still be Division I? Will AQs exist? Will scholarship limits exist? Will staffing limits exist? I can't answer those questions today. What I do know today is that the role that a conference is going to play in administering the new NCAA will be greater going forward than it's ever been in the past. And so conference membership and conference affiliation takes on perhaps greater meaning today than it ever has in the past. And so those were the things that were bouncing around in my head as we made the decision that we need to investigate this. The other piece of this, I've got 2 graphs up there. This is a graph on the left that tracks number of institutions that change conference affiliation in a given year. You see this here, this 12, 13, 14, 15, where you've got this group of schools who are changing, either coming up, going from Division II to Division I, or changing Division I to Division I, or like an App State going from FCS to FBS. This captures all of that. This period here in this 12, 13, 14, 15, recall, is when the college football playoff system was created. It's also when the Power Five the autonomy conferences were created, when those 5 conferences were given the ability to make legislation that only applied to them, it was mandatory for them, but permissive for everyone else. And so they began to exercise those opportunities as the autonomy conferences to try to address some of the frustrations they have had under the Division I model. This is also, for those of you who remember 2014-15, when we began our first conversation as a department about looking at the Division I landscape and trying to make a decision about, are we appropriately affiliated or aligned with our objectives as an institution with our conference membership. And so here, again, we've got 47 schools so far this year that have either changed conferences or announced their intention to change conferences. This is I can only go back 10 years. This is the highest year on record, and we're not done. It's being driven, in my mind, by Alston, the changes that are anticipated with Alston, and with the new Division I structure. And people are trying to read the tea leaves and figure out where they can be in order to benefit themselves and their student athletes and their institutions from a revenue and a control perspective. And we're seeing that reflected in this level of movement. So with that backdrop, the determination was made that I should investigate this invitation. The other piece that's happened subsequent to that decision is what's occurred in the Big South with the football playing institutions. And again, many of you are aware of that. At the end of the 2021 season, Kennesaw State and North Alabama, who had been football playing members of the Big South, transitioned back to the ASUN conference. We knew that was coming. They are members of the ASUN in all sports except football. The ASUN did not sponsor football, so they were members of the Big South for football purposes only. The ASUN made the decision a couple of years ago to sponsor football, and so we knew that Kennesaw State and North Alabama were going to move from the Big South back to the ASUN for full conference membership. What we did not know is that in January, 2 additional members of the Big South, Hampton and Monmouth University, were also going to announce that they were moving their conference membership from the Big South to the Colonial Athletics Association. Now, what that does is it takes the number of football playing institutions in the Big South from 9 to 5. In order to qualify for an AQ, a conference must have 6 members playing any sport, a minimum of 6. The Big South currently has 5, including A&T. We are the 5th. For the 22 season, the Big South Conference is working with Bryant University. Bryant University is in Rhode Island. They are looking for a football home and have expressed interest in joining the Big South for football only. That would give us 6 and allow us to maintain our AQ. For the 23 and 24 and beyond, the Big South is in conversation with the OVC, Ohio Valley Conference. They are similarly situated in terms of number of football playing schools and need a home. Combined, we would have more than the 6 needed to maintain the AQ that currently exists for the Big South Conference. The OVC has football playing institutions that are located in Tennessee, Missouri, and Illinois. So those are the factors that led us to this place where we are discussing a potential change in conference affiliation.